What would you do if you walked into your home and found everything you loved ripped away in an instant? How would you cope if, in the midst of unimaginable grief, the world began to suspect you were to blame? And what if the fight to clear your name lasted over a decade while the truth seemed just out of reach? Imagine returning home after a routine evening, only to find your entire family brutally murdered. The shock, the horror, the suspicion. This was the unimaginable reality for David Camm, a former Indiana state trooper whose life took a devastating turn no one could have foreseen. Today, we'll unravel the complexities of this case's story that intertwines family tragedy and a relentless pursuit of justice. What happened that night, and why did it take so long to uncover the truth? Stay with me as we explore a case that left a community shattered and raised questions about justice that still linger today. Housevil, true crime involving family. Every family has secrets, any family can cross the line. Hi, I'm Matt. Welcome to Housevil, where we explore the darkest stories of family secrets turned tragic. In this episode, we examine the harrowing case of David Camm, a man who faced the devastation of losing his wife and children, only to be accused of their murders. Join me as we unravel the complexities of this case, the controversial investigations, and the quest for truth that followed. David Camm, 36, was widely regarded as a family man and a dedicated professional. His role as an Indiana state trooper earned him respect in the community, and his devotion to his wife, Kim, 35, and their two children, Brad, aged 7, and Jill, aged 5, painted the picture of a quintessential suburban family. The Camms lived in a modest yet comfortable home in Georgetown, Indiana, where their days were filled with activities familiar to any close-knit family: school pickups, extracurricular events, family dinners, and weekends spent together. To those on the outside looking in, the Camm family seemed to have it all. David and Kim met in the early 1990s and quickly formed a bond. Their shared values and love for family made them a perfect match. By 1995, they were married and ready to build a life together. As their family grew with the births of Brad and Jill, their home became a hub of activity. Brad, a spirited and curious boy, was often seen playing sports with his friends, while Jill, with her bright smile, enjoyed spending time with her mother. Kim balanced the demands of motherhood with grace, always prioritizing her children and ensuring their happiness. David's role as a state trooper brought stability to their lives, but also came with its challenges. Long hours and high-stress situations were part of the job, yet David managed to compartmentalize his professional life and maintain a strong bond with his family. He was a regular participant in community events, often attending church gatherings and playing basketball with friends at the local gym. For David, these moments of camaraderie were not just a way to stay fit, but a vital part of his social life. However, beneath the surface of their seemingly perfect life, there were cracks that would later come to light. During the investigation into the murders, it was revealed that David had been unfaithful to Kim on multiple occasions. He had carried on affairs with several women over the years, relationships that were hidden from view, even from those closest to him. While these indiscretions were not known to the public before the tragedy, they added a layer of complexity to the narrative surrounding David Camm. On the evening of September 28, 2000, the Camm family's routine seemed no different than usual. David was at a basketball game at a local church, a weekly tradition he rarely missed. It was a chance for him to unwind and connect with his friends. Kim, meanwhile, had spent the evening shuttling Brad to his swimming practice while Jill stayed home. The family had planned to regroup later that night, settling into their familiar routine after their respective activities. But that night would prove to be anything but ordinary. After finishing his basketball game, David left the church around 9 p.m., heading home to reunite with his family. The drive was uneventful, the quiet streets of Georgetown offering no hint of the horrors awaiting him. Pulling into the driveway, David was met with an eerie stillness. The lights in the house were off and the garage door was open. Unease crept in as he stepped out of his car and approached the garage. What David found would forever alter the trajectory of his life. Inside the garage, Kim lay sprawled on the floor, lifeless and covered in blood. Panic surged through him as he rushed to check on his children. Opening the door to the family's Ford Bronco, he was confronted with an even more harrowing sight. Brad and Jill were still strapped into their car seats, both fatally shot. The air was thick with the metallic scent of blood and the weight of unspeakable violence. David's reaction was immediate and visceral. He called 911, his voice trembling with anguish and desperation as he described the scene. "Oh my God," he repeated, barely able to process the reality before him. His cries for help conveyed the unimaginable pain of a father and husband who had just lost everything. As first responders arrived, the house became a flurry of activity. Police officers and investigators meticulously documented the crime scene, noting the position of the bodies, the blood spatter patterns, and the shell casings scattered across the garage floor. To David, it felt like a surreal nightmare, one he hoped he would soon wake up from. But the harsh reality was inescapable. His wife and children were gone, and his life as he knew it had been irreparably shattered. In the days that followed, the small community of Georgetown grappled with the enormity of the tragedy. News of the murders spread rapidly, leaving neighbors and friends in shock. How could such a horrific crime occur in their peaceful town? The Camm family had been a beloved presence in the community, and their loss was felt deeply. Yet, even in their shared grief, questions began to surface. Who could commit such an atrocity? What motive could drive someone to target a seemingly happy family? As the investigation unfolded, the revelations about David's affairs complicated the picture, raising further questions about the man at the center of the storm. These revelations, while not direct evidence of guilt, cast a shadow over the idyllic image of the Camm family and became a contentious point in the long battle for truth and justice. Returning home around 9:20 p.m., David Camm walked into a living nightmare. As he stepped into the garage, his eyes were met with a horrifying sight. His wife, Kim, was sprawled on the cold concrete floor, lifeless, a pool of blood beneath her. His heart raced with panic as he turned to the family's Ford Bronco, where his children, Brad and Jill, were still strapped in their car seats, both fatally shot. The air was heavy with the stench of death, and David's world shattered in an instant. Overwhelmed by grief and confusion, he frantically called 911, his voice trembling with desperation as he begged for help. Emergency responders arrived swiftly, and the Camm home became a crime scene under the watchful eyes of law enforcement and forensic teams. Investigators scoured the area, photographing the scene, collecting evidence, and attempting to piece together the tragic sequence of events. At first, their focus was on finding an external perpetrator, but within days, the investigation took a shocking turn. Suspicion began to circle back to David himself. The evidence that pointed to David as a suspect was both circumstantial and scientific. Most notably, 8 minuscule bloodstains were found on the t-shirt David had worn that night. A forensic analyst determined the stains were high-velocity impact spatter, consistent with someone standing close to a victim at the time of a gunshot. This detail became the cornerstone of the prosecution's case, suggesting David had been present when his wife and children were killed. Compounding the scrutiny were allegations of David's infidelity, with testimonies claiming he had engaged in extramarital affairs. Stories the prosecution used to paint a picture of a man discontented with his life and capable of extreme violence. Despite David's steadfast claims of innocence and the corroborated alibi provided by his basketball teammates, he was arrested and charged with the murders of his family. The trial that ensued captivated public attention, drawing intense media scrutiny. Prosecutors presented a chilling narrative of premeditated murder, alleging that David had coldly and calculatingly taken the lives of his wife and children. His role as a former law enforcement officer added an additional layer of shock and betrayal to the story, fueling speculation and debate. For David, the nightmare of losing his family was compounded by the weight of public condemnation and a justice system seemingly intent on proving his guilt. The man once respected for upholding the law now found himself fighting for his freedom in a case that divided a community and sparked a firestorm of controversy. In March 2002, after an emotionally charged trial, David Camm was convicted on 3 counts of murder and sentenced to 195 years in prison. The verdict was a moment of seeming resolution for the community, devastated by the loss of the Camm family and eager for justice. Yet for David and his remaining supporters, it was only the beginning of a long, arduous fight. The conviction rested heavily on the controversial interpretation of the bloodstains on David's t-shirt and the portrayal of his character as a man with marital issues and alleged affairs, circumstantial evidence that left lingering doubts. In 2004, the Indiana Court of Appeals overturned David's conviction, ruling that the prosecution's heavy reliance on testimony about his alleged infidelity had unfairly influenced the jury. The court determined that these allegations had no direct connection to the murders and had prejudiced the jury against David. With his conviction vacated, David was granted a new trial, though freedom was still out of reach as prosecutors prepared for another round. The second trial, held in 2006, introduced a new twist. Investigators presented a gray sweatshirt found at the crime scene. Previously overlooked, the garment contained DNA that did not match David or his family. Through advanced DNA analysis, the evidence was linked to Charles Boney, a man with a violent criminal record, including convictions for armed robbery and assault. When questioned, Boney claimed he had provided the murder weapon to David in what he described as a botched murder-for-hire scheme. This testimony painted a new, albeit far-fetched, narrative that David had orchestrated the killings and used Boney as an accomplice. Despite inconsistencies in Boney's account and his well-documented criminal past, the jury convicted David for a second time. The prosecution's narrative, now bolstered by Boney's involvement, seemed compelling enough to overshadow the glaring gaps and contradictions. David was sentenced again to life in prison without parole. But the fight wasn't over. In 2009, the Indiana Supreme Court reviewed the case and overturned the second conviction. They cited prosecutorial misconduct, including the improper admission of evidence and the mishandling of forensic details. Additionally, questions arose about the reliability of the blood spatter analysis, which had been a focal point of both trials. The court's decision set the stage for a third trial, one that would finally unravel the case's most pressing mysteries. In 2013, the third trial began, with David's defense team armed with new strategies and evidence. They meticulously dismantled the prosecution's reliance on blood spatter analysis, bringing in experts to refute the claim that the stains on David's t-shirt were consistent with high-velocity impact spatter. They argued that the patterns were more likely caused by transfer from the chaotic scene when David discovered his family. Moreover, the defense shifted focus to Charles Boney, highlighting his violent tendencies and the implausibility of his testimony. They pointed out that Boney's DNA was found not only on the sweatshirt but also on Kim's shoes. These facts, combined with his inconsistent statements and refusal to admit his own culpability, painted a picture of Boney as the true perpetrator of the murders. After nearly 13 years of legal battles, the jury in the third trial delivered a verdict of not guilty. David was finally exonerated, bringing an end to his ordeal. However, the emotional scars and the unresolved pain of losing his family remained. The case left lingering questions about the justice system's handling of forensic evidence, prosecutorial conduct, and the ease with which public perception can be swayed. On October 24, 2013, after 13 years of legal battles and imprisonment, David Camm was acquitted of all charges. The courtroom erupted in a mix of relief and disbelief. For David, it was the end of a harrowing journey through a justice system that had failed him multiple times. The case had drained millions from the state's coffers and left an indelible mark on all involved. In the aftermath, David sought to rebuild his life. He became an advocate for the wrongfully convicted, working with organizations dedicated to preventing miscarriages of justice. The state of Indiana faced scrutiny over its handling of the case, prompting discussions about forensic evidence's role and the potential for confirmation bias in investigations. The David Camm case is a chilling example of how the pursuit of justice can go tragically awry. It highlights the devastating consequences of tunnel vision in investigations, where early assumptions can overshadow critical evidence and lead to grievous errors. From the outset, the focus on David as the primary suspect set the tone for a prosecution that prioritized character attacks and shaky forensic interpretations over solid proof. The result was a man wrongfully convicted not once but twice, and a family torn apart by grief and public scrutiny. For David, the journey was one of profound loss, not only of his wife and 2 young children, but also of 13 years of his life spent behind bars for crimes he did not commit. His fight for freedom became a fight to expose the flaws in a system that had failed him. The case also served as a stark reminder of the fallibility of forensic science, particularly the misuse of blood spatter evidence, which became a central yet deeply flawed pillar of the prosecution's case. The introduction of Charles Boney into the narrative during the second trial revealed how crucial missed evidence can be in shaping the trajectory of justice. Yet, even with Boney's DNA at the crime scene and a history of violent offenses, the path to exoneration for David was fraught with obstacles, compounded by prosecutorial misconduct and media-fueled narratives. Ultimately, the not guilty verdict in 2013 brought long overdue vindication, but no court decision could undo the years of suffering or replace the family he had lost. The Camm case underscores the importance of rigorous standards of evidence, the dangers of preconceived notions, and the profound human cost when the system falters. It serves as a sobering reminder that the justice system must remain vigilant in its commitment to fairness, transparency, and truth. If you found this story compelling, don't forget to subscribe to Housevil for more stories that reveal the dark truths behind family bonds. Share your thoughts in the comments, and I'll see you in the next one.